And we're in the sermon series called The 7 Deadly Sins. This is not a sermon series, aimed to make you feel guilty and make you feel like worse of a person, but it's actually being able to understand our own hearts, then to be able to see how amazing God's grace really is. And today we're going to talk about the sin called sloth. So I'm going to read Matthew chapter 25, 14 to 30. For it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who had received 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here I have made 5 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also, who had the 2 talents, came forward, saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here I have made 2 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He who also had received the 1 talent came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid and went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours. But the master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has will more be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness, in the place where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Let's pray. Dear God, I just pray that you may open up our ears and our hearts to receive your words. Lord, may it challenge us and may it help us to be able to seek and draw closer to you. Lord, I pray that the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts may be holy and pleasing to you. I pray that your gospel will be preached, and Lord, that your spirit may work in our hearts. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. A lot of times when we think of this idea of sloth or the sin of sloth, you automatically probably have a person that comes to mind. Maybe it's like a brother or a family member or that one person in your group of friends where you just kind of want to throw a Nike sneaker at them and say, just do it, like get up and do something. Don't just breathe there. And a lot of times when it comes to this sin called sloth, we think it's a matter of just getting up and doing something. And we point to the person that's just playing video games all day and saying you're not being productive. But this idea of being lazy or unproductive is kind of just the tip of the iceberg. If we actually dig a little bit deeper, with every deadly sin that we've been talking about up to this point, it's never just on a surface level type of thing. It's always digging deeper underneath to see what's going on in the heart. See, sloth is not just an external behavior, or else it wouldn't be a deadly sin. But this idea of being lazy is something else going inside in the heart. Just to get straight to the point, sloth is a corruption of a joyful excitement in what you're called to do. It's kind of a corruption in the sense of purpose that you have in what you're called to do. It's kind of like being apathetic to the important things in life, and even more importantly, to the spiritual things in life. So more than laziness in our actions, sloth is this joylessness in our heart for things that we might be called to do. It's kind of a spiritual apathy. We may know that something is good for us or even something necessary. We may know that it's much more important, but we can't seem to get ourselves to really care. It's this joylessness in our calling. Let me show you what I mean. Let's look at kids, right? The so-called lazy ones, the ones that don't do their homework, they refuse to do anything, they go in their rooms, maybe play video games or watch Netflix or I don't know if they watch Netflix or watch YouTube all day, or maybe college students that play poker all day, and you're like, man, such lazy people. But if you think about it, are they really lazy? I mean, why is that they're not lazy about everything in life? I mean, you guys ever play games, like video games? It's actually really hard to do. Like, I try to play video games with my friends. Like, you actually got to put hours of work into it to be pretty decent at it. And every time I try to play, I'm just pretty bad, and like I'm just not good at it. I mean, but you get what I'm saying? Like, a kid who refuses to do his homework but plays guitar all day, he's not lazy. I mean, my mom couldn't get me to learn an instrument even though she paid for lessons. Like, I don't want to do that. You know, when I was a young pastor, I remember this one junior high boy. He was actually known for lying about stuff. And he would actually, fake cry. He was an annoying little kid, to say the least. But this one, we're at a retreat. We're all singing together. And this guy starts to limp and walk towards the back of the room. And there happened to be a couch right in back of the worship room. And he just goes there and plops onto it. And I'm like, we're just starting right now. I start to look at him. I give him that look like, yo, what are you doing, man? And he looks at me. He's like, Pastor Paul, my leg hurts. I'm in pain. I have to sit down. And I'm like, oh, that... like, liar, I know you're lying. And then after service, like, he didn't know that after the service we had this whole plan to go outside to like do these night games and be playing all night. And suddenly after the worship service, he's been sitting back there kind of lazing about, like not doing anything. And finally we were like, hey, we're all gonna go for a night game and we're gonna play this, like, have your flashlights ready. And suddenly this guy jumps up onto his feet. It's like, yo, let's go. And he starts running around. I was like, yo, I thought you were hurt. He goes like, and he looked at me, he was like, God healed me, and I was like, you liar. So it's more than just actions. I mean, it's actually what's kind of going on in the heart. In fact, you can be the busiest person alive, but still be under the power of sloth. And we're going to be talking about how this could be. When we look at our passage this morning, I don't think it's a coincidence that it's the man with just one talent, who finds this heart of sloth come over him. I mean, this is the guy that went and dug a hole and put it in there and buried it, while the others actually went out and invested it and made more. For this text, I kind of took a moment to step into the shoes of this guy on why he would feel this way. And when I actually did this, I was like, I kind of get it. I think I might have done the same thing too. One, there's two factors that might contribute to that loss of motivation. One, he got less than the others. I mean, it's possible that this guy was staring at his measly one talent, and you're like, I can work my butt off to maybe double this, but it's still going to be the same as the guy that started off with that much. I mean, what's the point? Shoot, it's not fair. I mean, my master dealt me some bad hands. Like, what's the point of working? What's the point of doing anything from there? And the second thing I think he could have thought was, hey, wait, but I'm just a servant. I'm not the owner. Those profits aren't mine anyway. Why work? And we see this heart come out in verse 24. He says this, he also who had received one talent came forward saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. I mean, I think I kind of get it. I mean, don't you agree? Why work hard if it's not going to help my bottom line? I mean, why go and invest it if someone else is going to take the profit? And you begin to see how these two things begin to work together, and it sucks out any type of joy that you can have in what you're doing. You're like, what's the point? I got the bad end of the stick. I don't want to do this anymore. People got more talents. Why try? And you begin to think, what's the point? So what do? You just bury the talent. Why try? And in both cases, it adds to this loss of motivation, this loss of purpose, this loss of joy in what you do, and now the sloth takes over. But the point of this parable is actually to show you that these two mentalities is kind of an illusion. It's blinding us from seeing our real purpose and the real benefits that are there in being able to invest for God. It's not reality. You see, Jesus is saying, wake up. Wake up. Everybody was struggling with it. He's like, wake up. Life is more than what you see on the outside. If you don't see the greater vision of what's going on in this world, if you don't see the greater vision for what your heart was called to do, then of course you're going to face slothfulness. I mean, and not see the point in everything. The thing is, when you sit there and actually think about life, and philosophers have been doing this for centuries, they sit there and they ponder about life, and they're like, what is the purpose of life? You guys ever sit there and think about what the purpose of life is, and you take God out of the picture, you're going to end up in a place where there's like, there is no purpose. I mean, it's been done over and over again. This is why existentialists actually exist. They're like, there's no point, and they stop doing anything. Why? Why? Because you work hard, and it can be taken away just as easily. You can work hard, and at the end of the day, you lose it all. You're not going to take anything. what has been done, what you thought was creativity, was been done in the past. I mean, you guys read Ecclesiastes. It talks about this over and over again, even to the point where King Solomon, the greatest philosopher, the lover of wisdom, the great philosopher back in his time, he says, everything in this world apart from God is meaningless. Meaningless. And this, you have to understand the context of this parable. Jesus is actually telling this parable in terms of looking towards the end of time. He was like, you have to know your bigger purpose, the greater vision, the end of time. This entire chapter of chapter 27, Matthew chapter 27, is basically talking about the end of time when Christ comes again, which we know to be the end of at least this world. And in that context of the end coming, he first talks about the 10 virgins that are waiting for their groom, so they have to prepare themselves, wait for their groom. And the ones that don't prepare themselves, they find themselves kind of in a bad place. And then we hear of this passage, and then after this one, after this parable, he talks about the end of time when they're facing judgment. So I mean, this whole parable, this whole chapter is talking about seeing the end coming. And Christ is basically saying there's a purpose to everything that we do in this world. Don't forget that. The work that you are doing is not really about yourself. It's not what you get out of it. It's more than that. The talents that you have were not given to you so you can calculate what you can get out of it. Because if you do that, you're going to end up that nothing's really worth it. But at the end of the day, and it might not add up, but Jesus is saying, hey, it's using what I give to you to invest in my mission, my purpose. Yes, the expansion of my kingdom, my wealth. And when Jesus is saying, telling this parable, he's saying, I am that master. Look to my purposes. And the reason why the response feels kind of harsh when he's talking to this slothful servant, it's not so much because the servant didn't do anything. It's not because he didn't produce monetary profits. It's not even about that. But what the master is looking for is the heart. I think at that moment he's realizing this guy has no idea who I am, nor does he understand my character and my mission. I mean, let's look at the response of this guy. He says, Master, I knew you to be a hard man. The reason why this is here, this is supposed to be kind of like a symbolic moment where he's not really a hard man, but he's saying, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours. See, I got to make it really clear, right? See, God is not frustrated in our lack of ability to produce anything. He's not disappointed when we fail to reap a great profit or fail to live up to a certain standard. That's not the dividing factor. But what breaks us away from God is when we don't know who he is, when we don't know his character, his heart, his work. Therefore, we don't have a relationship with him. Therefore, in this life, we think that there's a God up there just trying to suck up all the things from us, and we're busily working for him. When we don't realize that, look, at the end of the time, this guy is giving more. He's constantly giving away. He wants us to know who he is, know his heart, to love in him in response. So the master replies very harshly. He says, you wicked and slothful servant, you don't know who I am. I'm not gathering where I have no scattered no seed. In fact, I'm giving you more at the end, and you're going to have an abundance. Therefore, he takes away what he has and he gives it to the other person. The master is basically saying, don't you know that all I give and bestow upon you is so that I can give you more? Don't you know that my heart's intention are for your benefit? Don't you know that I'm not a stingy master who is using you, but a master who considers you my partner in ministry? I consider you my child, and you're the heir to these riches. You're not working for me. You are working with me, and your treasures are at the end of time. Don't you know that my investments, my goals are for something so much greater, and you have no idea who I am? Be gone. And this is the heart of the sloth. It's blind. It's a blindness to see who the real master is, and also the failure to see the real purpose of why you're actually there. See, we have to see the reason why Jesus is talking in this matter. He wants his followers to wake up. He's talking to his disciples. He's talking to the people that are following after him. He's saying, stop wasting your time on things that don't matter, because that's what sloth is. You know, when a parent yells at their child for wasting your time, like just sitting around, I don't know what kids do these days. Maybe they're looking at their phones or whatever you look at, and you're like, that's not really helping you in life, and they get frustrated about it. They're right in calling them slothful. Why? Because they're failing to see what's better, what's more important. You know, our energies are being spent on things that don't last. I mean, watching every last episode of a TV show is not the best use of your time, and I'm guilty of this, yelling at myself while I'm doing this. But the same thing can be said about other things, right? There are some workaholics in this room who feel like you have no trouble with this idea of slothfulness, with this particular sin. I don't need to hear this one. I got this. In fact, I work all the time. I'm producing something all the time. I'm a money-making machine. I've won awards. I've climbed up every ladder I can in my field. But let me ask you, have you invested in the more important roles, maybe as a father or mother or friends, loved ones? Do your children know you? And no doubt you have the best intentions for providing for the family, but in the process, have you lost sight of something more important? If you read statistics of some of the most successful people in the world, you often find that something else often dies in its place. For many pastors, families are often put on the altar of sacrifice for the sake of the church. And I think what Christ is saying is like, this is sloth too. They've lost sight of their greater calling. Netflix binging or workaholism is often find the same root in the same sin because it loses focus on the same type of greater calling. See, laziness or sloth is not merely inaction, but it's a loss in motivation for what is truly better. See, Jesus is drawing an analogy with his kingdom. He says, are you losing sight of your master in heaven? Are you losing sight of your mission? Have you lost sight of the person who has given you all your talents? Have you lost sight of what investments are truly worth it? Yet, our text actually shows that it's a sad reality that oftentimes we only realize it when it's too late. Look at the servant. Only at the end does he realize that he actually lost. A few years ago, a woman who was dying, I met up with her. She was a mother of a friend. And as she was dying, she knew that I was a pastor. And she was looking at me. She was like, hey, I'm beginning to realize only what matters is what is eternal. And she said, I lived hard to get a lot of things in this world, but at the end, you can't take any of it with you. Nothing lasts. You can acquire a lot of things, but nothing really matters. It doesn't do anything. The more you have, it doesn't do anything. And she was like, only Jesus matters. Only what we do for him matters. And those words stuck to me, because you see the sincerity in someone that is facing the end of time, and it puts things into perspective. And maybe some of you in this room can get into some of that perspective, right? And maybe some of you are like, yeah, you're right. I'm going to go back and focus on more important things. I'm going to do more devotion or spend time with my family. I don't know. But do you know why we call sloth so dangerous or so deadly? Because at its ultimate form, even when you know what's better, even when you know what you have to do, it's the heart that looks at it and says, so what? It is what it is. We spent so much time talking about sloth being a failure to see what's more important, but what makes it actually more scary is sloth is when you can see what's more important, but you just don't care. The apathetic heart. Sloth is deadly because this mentality, more often than not, really jumps into our spiritual realm, right? Or we can look at the cross, we can look at the sacrifice, we can come to church, sing some songs, and hear of God's amazing grace and all the love that he pours and the heaven that he has promised for us. And we're just like, so what? So what? In my opinion, one of the scariest things to hear from your congregation is not so much a person who comes crying to you because they need help. And I'm not worried about someone who's struggling with alcoholism and they're coming to you because they want to grow and get out of it. I'm not worried about the druggie that says I'm no good and I don't know if God loves me. I'm not worried about them. Because they often find God's strength in their weakness. But the greatest nightmare is a person that goes, Pastor, I just don't care. What do you do? It's like cancer, right? You just pray for a miracle. Like, what do you do? Talk about it more? I don't care. Sometimes hardships and pain is more of a blessing than comfort and pleasure. If comfort and security numbs you from seeing your need of God. If you're struggling every day and you're praying every day, you're asking God for help, wishing whatever you're facing at that moment would just pass by, and you can't help but be in desperation, I would say that you might just be in a more blessed state than someone who has everything that they ever wanted, yet can't find joy or gladness or thankfulness in it. The ultimate form of sloth and its greatest danger is not finding joy in God nor his purposes. One pastor defined it like this. He said, sloth is a sorrow or joylessness about what is spiritually good in its ultimate form. Finding no joy in the things that are truly good for you. And if God truly is where every good and perfect thing comes from, then the peak of sloth is finding no joy in the things of God. You know, if the sin of sloth was a battle against being unproductive or not being so-called lazy, I don't need to preach this sermon. I mean, you guys can go meet up with some motivational speaker or a life coach, or, you know, look up Tony Robbins. He's pretty motivational. He'll get you, moving. He'll yell at your face and be like, wake up. Or maybe you just need a wife that's more like a drill sergeant that's nagging. I don't know. You know, things will work better than this sermon. You can overcome being lazy without Christ, but you can't get rid of this inner spiritual sorrow or apathy without God. You know, some of you guys might have started your Christian walk with a lot of passion. You were excited for things of God. Maybe, I remember when I first came to Christ, I was so excited that I went home and tried to evangelize to my sisters who already believed, and it's like, you got to believe. And she's like, I believe. I went out to all my friends. I'm like, yo, you guys got to believe. You're a Jesus freak. I was like, so what? I don't care. But at some point, even as a pastor, you lose motivation. I mean, isn't that the same with relationships? I mean, look over to your spouse. Remember when you guys first started dating and you were on the chase and you're like, if I just get this one person or everything would be all good, and you sang songs together, went on dates and stuff like that. Or remember when your first child was born? At least for me, I remember tearing up and saying in my heart, you, my daughter, I'm going to be the best father ever. I'm going to die for you. I'll lay down my life for you, and like quoting these things in my head, tearing up. These days I can't put down my iPhone for her. I can't lay down my iPhone. But it changes, doesn't it? I mean, what are we called to do? What are we called to do? There's two things I think our text might teach us about how we can get to this point. And it sounds pretty cliche because you're going to be like, okay, you're telling us to get to know God more. But it's so true if you take it to its core. I mean, this entire sermon series, we talked about how sin occurs when there's a separation from God, whether it's a physical separation or an emotional separation. And the way that you fight any type of sin is by drawing closer to Him, spending more time with your master. See, in our Bible text today, one of the main reasons why the servant found himself in slothful laziness is because he had no idea who his master was. I mean, to him, he was a hard man. He was nothing like a hard man at all. He had no clue on what purpose he was working for. He had no vision or no idea that all the things that he was working for was actually for him and for the betterment of everything. But you only find that out by getting to know your master, learning his heart, learning what he cares for, learning his intentions, learning his goals, learning the direction he's taking this world, learning what he has already done. I mean, learning that this is a God working to renew and redeem and heal this world. Knowing that this is a God who has done his work in your heart, and he's not a God that just sat there. He came down from heaven to live a life on earth so that he can face sacrifice and death for us, and giving us salvation by losing everything. It's understanding that purpose. At the end of our text, it actually says that the master kicked the servant out and said that he threw him out to the place where there was gnashing and grinding of teeth or whatever. And people are looking at this like, wow, that's so harsh. Oh, did he really have to send him to hell for being slothful? I mean, but you guys have to realize that hell is not a place that God chooses to throw people in, but it's a place we go when we don't know who God is. And do you know what real hell on earth is? I mean, you can ask anybody. I mean, we talk about lakes of fire. Lakes of fire is not, you can get burnt. If you're a tough guy, you can withstand it. But you know what hell is? It's life on earth with no purpose. What's the worst thing you can ever say to somebody? Your life has no purpose. That's probably the worst thing you can say to somebody. But you could have the world live in luxury, but if you don't have purpose, people don't want to live. And that's the truth. My gosh, I think this whole text is basically talking about maybe slothfulness is that depression of not knowing what your purpose is. And Christ is saying, that's what I offer to you. Know me. And the second thing this text is actually talking to us is about is go and imitate your master. I was listening to a podcast, a fascinating podcast. It was about a guy who works in the industry of comic books and superheroes, a guy named like Greg Hurwitz or something like that. He's not really a Christian guy, but he studied like extensively on psychology and the importance of meaning making stories for people, not only to make sense of the world, but to have a purpose of their existence. So he's in the business of creating stories of superheroes, heroes that people can feel that they're a part of. And I thought it was crazy because he was like, there's a cult-like following in the Marvel world or in the DC world because these stories are spiking something in their hearts. They want to be a part of something. It creates purpose. And what was more interesting than that, he said this, I found myself coming to read the Bible more to be able to capture that purpose. And I was like, oh my gosh, like what's going on? And he states that, man, talking about justice and love, good and evil, that's all theological talk. Like you can't create purpose without talking about theology. And I think most of the world understands this. You got to be talking about theology to actually have a purpose for what we talk about, even in politics. And this is talking about, the interviewer actually asked me, he was like, so do you believe in God? And this guy was like, all I can say is that the Bible holds truths that seems to gravitate towards the human heart. And that's where he left it. And I was like, my goodness, man, talk about seeing the utter importance of knowing God's character and his sense of justice and love and rescuing people, but just not knowing to actually look at him, where we replace God with Superman and we feel good about it and wear his costumes all the time, And what boggles my mind is oftentimes people love Superman. He's glorified. While God, on the other hand, is blamed for all the bad things in life and seen as a bad master who just wants our devotion without realizing who God actually is. I mean, people don't know that God at all. I mean, do you understand that justice is deeply a theological thing? and that if we don't see God, there is no justice or meaning to justice. People don't understand that love comes from God because he defines it. That compassion was shown to God through the cross, and now we have compassion. People don't understand the beauty of sacrifice, that it comes from a God that sacrificed. I mean, this is a starting point of knowing your master, understanding the gospel, knowing that he loved you, knowing that he went on a rescue mission to save you, and that becomes a narrative that we place our lives in. And this is where, if you know the narrative, you begin to place yourself into it. And the second part of it, it really is to imitate that. I always wonder, like, what would have happened if the servant actually, even with his limited knowledge of the master, simply went out and did something with his talent? I mean, I think he could have learned more about his master. Because I think even if he failed, right, if he lost the talent, master comes back and said, I lost everything. But then he would have learned grace. Like, oh my gosh, I lost everything, yet he still loves me. He still forgives me, and he gives me another talent to try again. But if he went out and invested it, he would have been able to taste the fruits of what it means to live for something greater than himself. Where he goes out and he's investing for things in eternity, and he sees a huge return. And guys, these returns are not just like physical, I'm going to get richer if I believe in God. No, it's a spiritual blessing that comes upon you. Something that you'll never understand if your calculations are always thinking about you. In ministry, I found this so true. Sometimes I have the heart of the lazy servant where I'm sitting there calculating what I can get out of ministry. I mean, what recognition could I get out? What benefits? And I'm going to tell you, man, that's the fastest way to get burnt out and bitter. Fastest way. But the moments you actually feel joy in your heart is when you stop and say, wow, this is for God, not for me. I don't need anything out of it. There's such freedom. And God blesses that, triples that, doubles that, and adds more on top. It's the blessing that comes from the heart of living for something more than yourselves. The blessing that comes from living for God. It's saying, go out, imitate him. Our service for others, our sharing our faith, our acts of compassion, these are works of heroes where we find our identity and purpose because it's rooted in the type of God that we serve. Those are moments that we learn the heart of our master who has done the same for us. I used to think that living for God was such a burden, especially as a pastor. We sulk in our own sorrows, like, oh, woe to me, I serve God, and more and more I realize that these are moments given so we can learn the heart of Christ more. My gosh, there are blessings, not blessings for others, there are blessings. My mom was telling me of a sermon that she heard not too long ago, which shed some light on this. It's crazy that The story of the judgment day right after our parable goes like this. Let me read this to you guys. This is verse 34 to 40. I'm going to just read this to you guys. It goes like this. This is the end of time when everybody's in front of Christ, and he separates those that are with him and separates those that are not, and he says this. Then the king will say to those on the right, okay, it is on the screen, right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison to visit you? And the king will answer them, truly I say to you, as you did to one of the least of these my brothers, you did to me. At first I didn't get this, man. I didn't get it till actually my mom shed some light on this. I didn't get it. I thought, oh, does it mean that we got to do all these acts of compassion to get into heaven? And that's what I thought. But when looking at these worlds, you guys see what's happening? Jesus is saying, when we respond to the people that God brings in front of us and we imitate the character of God, we meet God himself. We meet our master himself. We meet him himself. You're not facing the person in front of you. You're meeting Christ himself, and you're learning his heart through your actions to him. I mean, living out the character of our master is living out the heart of grace and living out all these things. This is the way to meet Christ. Guys, sloth is to ignore the things of God. So the way to change it up is first you got to move towards the heart of God, learn him, know his narrative. And another way to meet him is through our imitation of him. And through that you learn his heart, you learn his character, you learn who he is, and you feel the fruits of living for his kingdom. And guys, sloth can't touch that. Let's pray.